What are sends and what are returns? So basically sends and returns are the exact same thing. Ableton, you have your main tracks right here, which can be audio or MIDI. And then down here, you have your sends/returns. Say for example, you have 10 drum loops, right? And you want to send them all to the same effect. Say it's a reverb. Rather than putting a reverb on each individual track, like if I did here, let's just pull up a random sample. Let's just look up kick, put a kick right there. And then we're going to look up snare. And then we'll add like a hi-hat, for example. So we have like a nice drum and bass groove going. But say for example, we want to send all that to a reverb. So rather than getting a reverb, throwing it on every individual track like we'll do here, there's a better way to do it. And especially for drum hits and any more transient based instruments, it's important to have a send and return. Rather than having individual reverbs on every track, we'll do that right now real quick. Everyone has the same reverb. Instead of doing that, what we can do instead is we can just send them all to the same reverb. The dry one, which is playing through the main track, and then you have the send version, which is just playing through the reverb. And with this in mind, 100% of the time usually, your send is going to be 100% wet. So that means it's going to be only the reverb signal. There's not going to be any dry signal playing at the same time. Meaning that we can kind of combine the dry signal with the wet signal to make a more cohesive sound without losing any of the transient punch from the drums, while also maintaining like whatever reverb or whatever room space we want. We're going to slowly bring in each of these elements. I'm going to do like -20 dB on each of them just to see what it sounds like. So, and then we can solo the reverb right here. So that's 100% wet. It's only keeping the wet stuff. And that's great because now if we turn these down even more, turn them down to like -30, we're still getting that punch from the transients while making sure that now we have a better space and different, atmosphere for the sample. With that in mind too, I generally do a lot of EQing for my sends and returns. For this in particular, since it's a reverb, I don't really want all the harsh highness and I don't want any of the lows. So I'll do like a very basic high and low shelf just to kind of carve out some of that mud that we don't need. You can go more dramatically if you want, but for the most part, I kind of want more of the body to be in the middle anyways. Usually why I keep it like that. But that's basically how sends and returns work. You can do it with other things too. Like it doesn't have to be just reverb. It doesn't have to be just delay. It could be anything you want. It's commonly known as like busing, where it's like, hey, for example, instead of putting effects on a group, say for example, I only wanted to add things to the kick and snare. So I can set the output to, instead of kick and snare group, I can set it to, let's just do audio 5 and then just call this a bus. This bus is going to be taking the signal from the kick and the snare only. So with that in mind, we can now do, we can set it to in. So it's going to be taking the input, and now we can add something like drum bus, right? So now anything we apply to this bus is going to be applied to the combination of both the kick and the snare. So why that's important is because now if I wanted to make the drums glue more, I can add a glue compressor to only specific ones while keeping the drums in the group, using that more of like an organizational tool. That's generally how I use groups anyways. I'll use it where even for just this template that I have, if you go into it, the drums are 4 different groups. There's kick and snare as one group, there's high percussion as another group, cymbals, and then low percussion. Meaning that anything in this group is gonna be a kick or a snare or something in that vein. Since this is a hi-hat, I'll move it down here. But now if I want to send all this to the same bus, I just need to change the output to whatever it is, whether it's the bus chain or some other section. That's for busing effects. Sends and returns are just sending it to another effect down here. I believe with Ableton, you're given like 10. Let me just double check that real quick. Okay, no, you're giving up to L. So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you're giving 12 return tracks, which is crazy because you can see all these values over here. They'll each have their own individual return send values. So if I increase this is sending it to send 1. If I increase this one, this is what? 3, 6, 8. So number 8. Generally, I don't really know if you're going to need that many returns, but you never know. I usually only have 5 that are pre-made. There's a short reverb, long reverb, plate reverb, and then 2 delays, but I keep it pretty small. This is important because sends and returns will save you a ton of CPU, especially when you're working in a larger project file. This one, for example, there's not that many tracks going on right now, but if I had another session with like 40 patches of Serum or like, a bunch of synths, a bunch of, EQing and whatnot, that's going to drain my computer a ton. And in order to avoid that, it's best to just use sends and returns returns, you can save some CPU and your mix will sound cleaner because now it's not sounding washy. You're not sending reverb directly on the thing. It's going to sound a little bit more clean. But with that in mind too, sometimes you want to have a sound design thing where you have reverb directly on the instrument. For example, if you're using like a pad or if you're using like a vocal chop and you want it to be kind of more washy, kind of more in the background, totally fine to have your reverb directly on the track. There's no hard set rules on doing that. It's really when is it best to apply this technique and when can you get the most out of it is the important thing to ask yourself. So that's what sends and returns are. I hope you guys learned something. Whatever DAW you're using, just create some for a template, figure out what sort of sends you use often, what sort of reverbs, what sort of delays you want to use, and just make it. Because now if I wanted to use reverb, I have it done. I don't need to dial in the settings. I can, just throw it to whatever send I need and I'll be good. So hopefully that helps.